To be immortal is commonplace. Except for man, all creatures are immortal, for they are ignorant of death. What is divine, terrible, incomprehensible is to know that one is immortal. What is a human? And why are we so certain that we know what one is? Is it because we all look alike and behave similarly so that we can scientifically organize ourselves into neat little categories? Because we saw our images in textbooks? What does it even mean to be a human? Is to be a human simply to be one among a number of animals? Does it mean to suffer and be subject to pitiless movements of space and time? To watch ourselves blossom and grow, only to fade and decay? Does it mean to think, to cogitate, to be conscious? To feel the subtleties and nuances of emotion? To have a past, present, and a future? Is it to build cities and empires, to enslave others with our ideas, only to be enslaved by those very ideas ourselves? Can we reduce ourselves to a particular activity? Homo economicus? Homo politicus? Homo sapiens? Are we political or religious agents? Agents of the state, of clans, of tribes? Or do we simply exist to perpetuate genes into the future, indefinitely, into a mindless teleology that consumes itself in a closed loop? As evolutionary biologists would suggest, the purpose of living is to procreate in order to ensure living, in order to continue procreating, forever on and on and on. Can we understand what a human being is by analogy to computer science, artificial intelligence? Can we determine whether an AI can think like a human being? And if they do, does that make them human? Our brave new world is moving toward transhumanism, with all the promises veiling all the lies of conquering nature, solving the so-called problem of death, allaying diseases and bodily injury that we suffer in the course of a lifetime, replacing our old parts with new ones, like a mechanic working on a car. All with the grand assumption that we're transcending the human condition. I can assure you, not one of these people knows what a human being is. You cannot transcend something you haven't attained, for we are not yet fully human. Does this statement frustrate you? I can only offer you vinegar to drink today, because aporia is a no-nonsense business. It is a stripping away of everything, and I mean everything you think you know and feel and seem to yourself to be. It's uncomfortable, it's scary, but that is how such corrosive waters work. One is not born a human being, but becomes a human being over the course of one's life, through arduous labor. And yet the majority of people are not even successful at actualizing it in its fullness. Many people are familiar with Carl Jung's archetypes. There's the trickster archetype, the mother archetype, the hero archetype, the magician archetype. But my goodness, how many infinite varieties of archetypes exist that we don't speak about? We're so unimaginative and take things so literally and repeat what we've read and heard and memorized. Not only are the archetypes innumerable, but the degrees that manifest from each archetype are also manifold. One of the things that Jung makes clear throughout his writing is that once an individual or collective is taken hold of by the force and power of an archetype, they are entirely possessed. Essentially, you don't know you've been possessed by an archetype until you've removed yourself from its influence, or its influence has subsided. You can only understand something when you are detached from it, when you are observing from a perspective outside of it, out of its sphere of influence. While possessed, you are in a trance. What we tend to forget, because we are so immersed completely in this archetype, is that human is also an archetype. Yes, you are born looking like other humans. You sound like other humans, smell like one, walk like one, talk like one. You can live your entire life as a so-called human being. The human that scientists refer to when they speak of humans as yet another mammalian in the animal kingdom. We used to hunt, forage, and we still engage in warfare, drink, eat, defecate, and copulate. This isn't all that different from the other animal activities that are shared by many other creatures on this earth. Modernity has removed the necessity of many of these activities dictated by nature, and yet we are no closer to arriving at what a true human is. The archetype of the human is called the anthropos, whether understood as the higher Adam, sometimes called Phos, Adam Kadmon, Gaiomart, or Purusha. It is opposed to the lower man, or the lower Adam, the bestial and more elemental parts of our being that participate and share characteristics with the animals and the vegetative aspect of the soul, the part of the soul that draws us downward, further into generation, in the moist and dark matrix of nature. Hear the words of the Chaldean oracles. Do not incline towards the somber world, under which is spread the formless, shapeless depth, wrapped in the darkness of filth, delighting in images, without intellect, precipitous, eternally twisting around its own maimed depths, always marrying a form invisible, inert, without pneuma. Clement of Alexandria even spoke of the primordial anthropos being established, quote, inside man. As the extracts from Theodotus state, the man inside man. And by these statements and Jung's formulation of the individuation process, one would be led to believe that it is the ego that slowly circumambulates the center of its being, the self, and slowly approaches it. But in a deeper esoteric fashion, it is the self within that seeks out its own center. The self approaches the self, and through that process comes to realize itself and make itself known to itself. Essentially, there is a force that exists outside of the will of the person that carries out this work. At times, it is not so much a matter of effort. In fact, effort can sometimes impede you in the alchemical work. There is also a letting go and a trusting in nature to fulfill the operations in good time. The emptying of the ego will help in this. At this point, we should note that for the Neoplatonists, particularly the later Neoplatonist schools of Iamblichus, the understanding is that the soul completely and entirely descends into generation and matter. Unlike Plotinus' position, where he believed the higher realm, the higher part, I should say, of the soul remains in the noetic realm, unmovable and unchanging to eternally comprehend the divine. Iamblichus' position insists that for cosmogenesis to be complete, it requires the soul to become fully embodied into materiality. It is therefore the purpose of Theurgy to embody the divine energia of the gods and to mirror their activities by participating in their activities. It is not a matter of bringing the gods down to our level or compelling them to do so through coercion or threats. Theurgic acts elevate the soul by forming containers for the divine and emptying out its contents so that it can mirror the gods in its own activities. It is taking the form of the gods. The human soul, however, never breaks free and transcends its ontological level. It is important to remember a simple law. A lower ontological being can never fully become the thing that is superior to it on the ontological chain. You cannot fully identify with a higher level, because then all participation is lost. You have effectively become that from which you manifested. And to have attained another level of being implies a change that is radically irreversible. In a real sense, the human archetype is never transcended. The ego can only attain the corresponding heaven of its being, which is the integrated man of Sufism, but also the object and the divine art of the alchemist. Man is a pontifex, he is a bridge, or if you will, a pillar, that straddles the divide between the sensible and the intelligible realms. He is the central axis of the tree of life. In the Kabbalistic tree, it is Christ who occupies this position, the Zephirah Tifereth. Christ is the redeemer of Adam. Without a comprehension of the verticality of being, none of these exercises will come to any good. Each level of being contains its own heaven and its own earth. Every human being is the earth of his or her celestial counterpart. one's guardian angel, or in Hermetic tradition, one's perfect nature, also understood as the active intelligence. Each celestial counterpart is therefore the heaven, the uppermost limit of the human, and therefore the end of the human archetype, which, mind you, encompasses incredibly varying degrees of manifestation. The angel says to the mystic, quote, "He contains me just as I contain you." And the mystic meets his or her angel by reorienting to the true Orient, not the geographic Orient of the East you find in a map, but the spiritual North, by climbing the psycho-cosmic mountain Kaf, the mystical Sinai, the Emerald Rock, the mystical earth of Hurkalia. There the pilgrim meets his or her celestial counterpart, the ontological superior being, from which you emanated from, and you are its earthly representative. It makes sense that you can lose your humanity by engaging in things that depress your soul into its animal regions. Whether you can fully lose your soul is something that we can discuss at a later date, but it seems that even the vilest of humans can still retain a glimmer of it, albeit infinitesimal. The further you descend into matter, the further the emanation takes you, the more occluded the soul becomes through the excretions of darkness and demonic corruption which envelops the soul that is imprisoned in matter. The Theurgist also acts as a conduit, by redeeming and thereby elevating the dark unconscious matter and transmuting it into its spiritual counterpart. The elements of fire, air, earth, and water are not simply metaphors, but they are physical substances that exist in a subtle state, of which their appearance to us through our senses is their outward manifestation, their symbolic zahir. The Theurgist is enlivening it through a spiritual hermeneutics whereby the dead substances or bodies are elevated into their spiritualized counterpart, something psychic and living, which had existed in potential in the life of all things of nature. By revivifying dead psychic life that exists in all matter, including our own souls, we are essentially retracting all projections of the psyche that are fixed in the exterior world and bringing it into consciousness through their images using the active intelligence, also known as the angel Gabriel. These images existed in all the manifold things of nature. Therefore, with alchemy, we cannot make a strict distinction between the spiritual or psychological component and the material substance components. It is firmly both. Let us speak a little longer on the Iamblichean conception of the human soul. He believed that the soul is transcended the corporeal, but that didn't imply that it belonged to the first principles, as thought by Plotinus. The soul was also inferior in relation to the higher levels of being, namely the heroes, the daemons, the angels, and the encosmic gods. Although the soul can make itself similar to the principal causes along with the intermediary beings, its essence is always different and set apart. The essence of the soul, again, is of a mediator, which means it is both divided and undivided, changing yet permanent, the one and the many, juxtaposed between the tensions of being and becoming. For Iamblichus, the origin of sin lies in chasing after immoral images that are given by our senses, by making wrong choices, misusing our free will, a prohairesis. And we'll find this in general agreement with Jung's belief that the origin of sin results in disregarding the numinous, as that is probably one of the highest levels of ignorance and abuse of free will as is possible to make. After all, to create error is to misapply free will by ignorance. As opposed to the higher beings who are stable, mortal beings are changeable, subject to armamene, and through the alternation of perfection and imperfection deriving through knowledge in action and ignorance respectively, the soul changes across time, and with it, its substance also changes. Because of its descent and its intermediary position, the impurity of the soul changes, quote, by living through so many divided lives. These are the planetary forces and personality aspects that divide and multiply the soul's substance. It is important to qualify that while the soul changes across time, it always remains as itself as a whole. Fundamentally, the soul is a coincidentia oppositorum between the movements of reversion and procession. It is a special kind of knowledge, of anamnesis, that allows the soul to return to its essence that was brought up by its becoming a stranger to itself, having, of course, descended fully into matter and the exterior world. The human soul, therefore, preserves its self-identity in the midst of movement. This is autokinetos, self in change. Transhumanism seeks to be the answer to the alienation experienced by the human being, without realizing that the alienation is part and parcel of what it means to be a human being. Iamblichus held this view, and in fact the human being is characterized by such a radical tension of opposites that it is through the difficult and painful process of reintegration and resolution of the polarities that we slowly ascend toward the heaven of our being. Of course, with the aid of our spiritual angelic guide or companion, in Socrates' view, his daemon. With regard to the painful process, Olympiodorus states, quote, "Without great pains, this work is not perfected. There will be struggles, violence, and war. And all the while the demon Ophiuchus instills negligence, impeding our intentions. Everywhere he creeps about, both within and without, causing oversights, anxiety, and unexpected accidents, or else keeping us from the work by harassments and injuries." As a soul that is both simultaneously immortal and mortal, we are torn by the extremes in our nature, pulled in radically different directions, up, down, left, right. Imagine the picture of Christ on the cross, such a powerful symbol. But we are also the mediators between the realm of being and the world of becoming. And unless we participate in the activities of the gods and learn how to form receptacles for them and identify them within our internal psyche and our external world, both things, of course, being varying degrees of prakriti and of our substance, we will remain in a state of forlornness and desolation, forever condemned to imagine things only horizontally, condemned to horizontal space and horizontal time, seeing all things through a linear causality, trapped in history, a world of perpetual revolution, going absolutely nowhere. After all, revolutions revolve like wheels on axles. They spin, change hands of power, but fundamentally go nowhere, since it fails to take hierohistory or liturgical history seriously. Since the world is a theophany, to the alchemist everything in nature is sacred, from the smallest pebble to the tallest mountain. So where does the profane come from, you ask? It seems to me that profanation exists only on the human plane, and it involves a misapprehension of the sacred, a turning away from the sacredness inherent in all things. It is a problem of human perception. When we cannot see or feel the sacred, it is a limitation of our own perception and our own judgment. It does not reflect reality. As Jung once pointed out when making an analogy about dream interpretation, paraphrasing, he essentially says that if you find a text that is in a language you cannot decipher, it does not negate the power and value of the text itself. It simply means that you have not found the means or the hermeneutical key to decipher it. The same applies to the world around you. The sacred is everything and everywhere. Nothing is profane. When you unveil yourself before God or the gods, they unveil themselves to you, because there is a mutual recognition between the lover and the beloved, always waiting for us to turn our gaze in their direction and open up our hearts. In one of her last lectures, Jung's student Marie-Louise von Franz once said that, quote, "Disregard of the numinous powers is, according to Jung, the essence of evil." Powerful actors in the world today seek to usurp the numinous powers of the gods, of God himself, of the divine. Through transhumanism, we disfigure only ourselves, because our ego inflation has insisted that somehow we've accomplished what we've set out to do through an artificial horizontal transcendence. And we will add yet another barrier for us reaching the archetypal summit of our own being and sever the trunk of the cosmic tree. May you remain blessed, healthy, and strong. Take care for now.